I sat at the polished mahogany table while my own sister slid a contract toward me, demanding I surrender my last remaining shares of our family business. My father told me not to make it difficult and ordered a security guard to escort me out of my own legacy. They called me a useless failure who did not belong in their elite world. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and told them they had just declared me completely unnecessary. They had absolutely no clue that the billion-dollar private equity firm they were begging to save them from bankruptcy was actually mine. The next morning, I froze every single one of their credit accounts and watched the empire they stole crumble to dust. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who grossly underestimated your true worth. I am Nathaniel Harrison, 34 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the invisible outcast of the Harrison family. The heavy wooden doors of the Harrison Logistics boardroom slammed shut with a finality that echoed deep in my chest. I stood at the foot of a 20-foot-long polished conference table, staring at the people who shared my DNA. They had summoned me here under the guise of a routine family trust update. But the moment I saw the arrogant smirks on their faces, I knew exactly what this gathering really was. It was a calculated ambush. At the head of the table sat my father, Richard. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his tailored suit projected the false image of a highly successful industry titan. To his right sat my mother, Patricia, her fingers adorned with massive diamonds she loved to flash whenever she spoke. To his left was my younger sister, Cassidy. At 31 years old, she had perfected the art of looking perpetually exhausted by my mere existence. And then there was DeAndre. My 33-year-old brother-in-law leaned back in a leather executive chair that did not belong to him. A striking African-American man with a silver-tongued charm that had completely blinded my parents the moment Cassidy brought him home. DeAndre had contributed absolutely nothing of value to this company. Yet he sat there spinning an expensive pen between his fingers, looking at me like I was a stain on the expensive carpet. "Let us not drag this out," DeAndre said, his deep voice carrying a tone of smooth, practiced arrogance. "Nate, you have been a ghost for years. You do not contribute to the logistics network. You do not bring in corporate clients. You just sit in your little apartment doing whatever it is you do. It is time to clean house." I kept my hands casually in my pockets, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they were starving for. "Clean house?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Is that what we are calling a hostile buyout of my grandfather's trust shares?" Cassidy slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the table. "Do not play the victim, Nate. You are holding on to 5% of a company you know absolutely nothing about. DeAndre has completely revolutionized our supply chain integration. He deserves those shares. You are just dead weight dragging down our profit margins." "Revolutionized," I repeated, looking directly at DeAndre. "Is that what we call losing the entire Midwestern distribution contract because you offended the regional director at a golf tournament?" DeAndre's jaw tightened. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered his composure. He sat forward, planting his elbows aggressively on the table. "I secured us a massive bridge loan that kept this place afloat while your father transitioned the board. I brought capital to the table. You bring nothing but an embarrassing reminder that the eldest Harrison son is a total failure." "DeAndre is right." My father finally spoke, his voice carrying the booming authority he reserved for firing subordinates. "Nate, you are 34 years old. You have no real career. You refuse to adapt to my business strategies. We are preparing to take Harrison Logistics public. I cannot have an erratic, unaccomplished shareholder sitting on our registry. It spooks the institutional investors. You want to take a company drowning in debt to an initial public offering?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "That is incredibly bold, Richard." My mother let out a dramatic, breathy sigh, bringing a manicured hand to her chest. "Here it comes," I thought to myself, "the inevitable gaslighting." "Oh, Nate, please do not be difficult," Patricia murmured, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine concern. "We are doing this for you, sweetheart. You have always struggled with pressure. You are just not built for the corporate world. We are offering you a very generous buyout. We will give you $200,000 for your shares. You can finally buy a nice little house in the suburbs, maybe find a steady, simple job. We just want you to be happy. $200,000. My grandfather's stake was easily worth $5 million. They were not just kicking me out of the family business. They were robbing me blind using DeAndre as the aggressive enforcer and Patricia as the emotional manipulator. 200,000, I said, letting the pathetic number hang in the air, for my birthright. It is more than generous for someone who contributes absolute zero, Cassidy snapped. Sign the papers, Nate. DeAndre needs those voting rights by Friday to secure the new tier of institutional funding. You are literally standing in the way of this family's future. DeAndre slid the contract down the polished wood table. It stopped mere inches from my hands. Look at it this way, man, DeAndre said, flashing a brilliant, utterly fake smile. You sign this document, you get a fat check, and I will personally make sure you get a steady job working the security desk down in the lobby. Keep you on the payroll, keep you in the family. The sheer audacity of the offer was almost impressive. My brother-in-law, a man who had married into wealth and was actively draining my family's corporate accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle, was offering me a minimum wage job at a reception desk in a building my own grandfather had built. I looked at my father. You are allowing this. You are letting him strip my shares away. Richard would not meet my eyes. He looked firmly at the wall behind my head. It is strictly business, Nathaniel. You have been a massive disappointment since the day you refused to enter the executive training program. You lack the killer instinct required for this industry. DeAndre has it. He is the son this company needs right now. I felt a cold, absolute silence settle over my mind. For 15 grueling years, I had endured their relentless comparisons. I had listened to them call me a failure, a college dropout, a complete disgrace. I had allowed them to believe their own twisted narrative because my true life required absolute discretion. I simply looked at the four of them, burning their smug, arrogant expressions into my memory. You want my shares? I said softly, breaking the heavy silence in the room. We demand them, Cassidy corrected sharply, glaring at me with undisguised contempt. I nodded slowly. Keep the contract. I will not sign it. My father's face flushed a deep shade of purple with instant explosive rage. He slammed his hand down on the table. You arrogant little fool. You have absolutely no power here. You will sign those papers right now, or I will legally dilute your shares until they are worth less than the paper they are printed on. You are out of this company, and you are officially out of this family. My father's shouting faded, replaced by suffocating tension. My mother immediately began weeping. It was a tearless performance designed to make me look like the aggressor. She clutched DeAndre's arm as if needing protection from her own son. Why do this? Nate Patricia cried with artificial concern. We offer you a lifeline, we offer you love, and you throw it right back in our faces. You have always been so incredibly selfish. Just like when you abandoned the family to go live in that pathetic studio apartment. You break my heart. You truly do. I did not abandon you, Mom, I replied, my voice completely devoid of the emotion she was desperately trying to provoke. I left because I refused to be a pawn in his tax evasion schemes. And DeAndre, I know exactly why you need my 5%. You need supermajority voting rights to approve a leveraged buyout of the company real estate assets. You will sell the warehouses from under my father to cover the hole you blew in the budget. DeAndre widened his eyes for a fraction of a second. The mask slipped. The pen he twirled stopped dead. I do not know what kind of paranoid garbage you have been reading online, but you are completely delusional. Am I? I asked softly, staring straight through him. My father stood up, his face dark with fury. I will not have you disrespecting DeAndre in this boardroom. He has secured us a $150 million lifeline from Vanguard Holdings. They are a top-tier private equity firm. They believe in his vision. They trust him. Who trusts you, Nathaniel? A bunch of freelance nobodies. Vanguard Holdings. Hearing the name of my own empire used as a weapon against me was exquisite irony. They had absolutely no clue that the faceless private equity firm that just bought their toxic debt was entirely owned by the son they were throwing out. Vanguard Holdings. I repeated, letting the name roll off my tongue. I hear they are exceptionally ruthless when it comes to collecting on their debts. Which is why DeAndre is handling them. Cassidy sneered, standing up to join her father. He speaks their language. He is a winner. Now are you going to leave voluntarily, or do we need to have you physically removed? My father did not wait for my answer. He pressed a button on the intercom system built into the polished table. Mr. Caldwell, get up here immediately. We have a trespasser. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Mr. Caldwell stepped into the room. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s wearing a pristine gray suit. To my family, Caldwell was the head of corporate security and a trusted legal advisor for Harrison Logistics. He had been working in this building for 4 years, hired shortly after DeAndre joined the family. What my family did not know was that I was the one who placed Caldwell here. He was not just security. He was one of my most senior corporate attorneys embedded to keep a silent, watchful eye on the crumbling foundations of my grandfather's company. Caldwell walked into the room, his face an unreadable mask of professional stoicism. His eyes flicked to me, then to my father. "You rang Mr. Harrison," Caldwell asked, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. "Escort my son out of the building," Richard barked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He is no longer welcome on these premises. If he tries to enter the lobby again, have him arrested." Caldwell did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He simply turned to me and extended a hand toward the door. "Sir, it is time to leave." DeAndre let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Do not trip on the way out, Nate. And hey, that security desk offer, it expires in 24 hours. You better think fast before your rent is due." I ignored DeAndre. I ignored Cassidy grinning like she had just won the lottery, and I ignored Patricia wiping away her invisible tears. I looked directly at my father. "You declared me unnecessary," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the room. "You chose a smooth-talking parasite over your own blood. Remember this exact moment, Richard. Remember the exact time on the clock." I pointed to the digital clock on the wall, which read 10:14 in the morning. "Because this is the minute you lost absolutely everything." "Get him out of my sight," Richard roared. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, my footsteps echoing loudly on the hardwood floor. Caldwell walked 2 paces behind me, maintaining the perfect illusion of a security escort. We walked down the long glass-paneled corridor, past the administrative assistants, who quickly looked away, and stepped into the private executive elevator. The moment the stainless steel doors slid shut, sealing us off from the floor, Caldwell reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a secure tablet. The stoic security guard vanished, replaced instantly by the razor-sharp legal mind I paid 7 figures a year to retain. "Well," Caldwell said, tapping the screen. "That was highly dramatic even for them." "Did you secure the audio?" I asked, loosening my tie. "Every word," Caldwell confirmed. DeAndre basically admitted to the attempted coercion for the voting rights. "Oliver has the file. We are ready to proceed. They really think Vanguard Holdings is going to save them," I muttered, shaking my head as the elevator descended rapidly toward the underground executive parking garage. "They are incredibly desperate," Nate Caldwell said, looking up from the tablet. DeAndre has funneled over $12 million from the operational accounts into offshore shell companies over the last 18 months. He bought that expensive watch using the employee pension fund. Harrison Logistics is running purely on fumes. The bridge loan from us is the only single thing keeping their lights on. And the collateral for that loan?" I asked, stepping out of the elevator into the dim, cool concrete expanse of the VIP parking garage. "Everything," Caldwell said with a grim smile. 85% of their commercial real estate, their private residential properties, and their personal investment portfolios. DeAndre signed it all away, and Richard rubber-stamped it because DeAndre convinced him Vanguard was a silent partner. "They wanted to play corporate warfare," I said, feeling the damp air of the garage against my face. "Let us show them how the game is actually played. Keep monitoring their internal communications, Caldwell. I want to know the exact second they realize the cash flow has stopped." Caldwell gave a crisp nod, turning back toward the service elevators, to resume his role as their loyal head of security. I walked past the row of leased Mercedes and BMWs that belonged to my father and brother-in-law, heading straight for the shadows at the far end of the garage. Waiting silently in the corner was a custom matte black armored Cadillac Escalade, The driver, a former military contractor named Thorne, stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. He wore a sharp black suit and mirrored sunglasses, standing at perfect attention. "Good morning, Boss Thorne," said his voice a low rumble. "Take us to headquarters, Thorne," I commanded, "and engage the privacy partition." I slid into the back seat. The heavy bulletproof door thudded shut behind me, completely sealing off the outside world. The interior of the SUV was a mobile command center outfitted with encrypted communication screens, secure satellite uplinks, and soundproof paneling. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the chilled console, letting the adrenaline of the boardroom ambush slowly dissipate into cold, calculated focus. I picked up the secure encrypted phone mounted on the center divider and hit a single speed dial button. It rang exactly once before a sharp British-accented voice answered. Oliver speaking. Oliver was my chief legal counsel and the principal architect of Vanguard Holdings' aggressive acquisitions department. If Caldwell was my shield, Oliver was my scalpel. He was ruthless, meticulous, and entirely devoid of empathy when it came to business takeovers. "The meeting is over," I said, leaning back into the leather seat as Thorne navigated the massive SUV out of the underground garage and into the blinding Seattle sunlight. "They tried to force a buyout of my 5% for $200,000. DeAndre threatened to dilute the shares if I refused." Oliver let out a dry, humorless laugh over the secure line. 200,000. That would not even cover the interest on the debt they owe us for this quarter. "I take it you did not sign." "I did not sign. Richard officially kicked me out of the company and the family. He told Caldwell to have me arrested if I ever returned to the lobby." "Excellent," Oliver said. I could hear the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "That legally severs any fiduciary duty you might have owed them as a minority shareholder under the family trust charter. You are now a completely independent hostile entity. We can proceed without triggering any familial conflict of interest clauses." For 10 grueling years, I had built Vanguard Holdings from a tiny seed capital fund into a billion-dollar private equity monster. I did it under airtight non-disclosure agreements and complex corporate veils. To the financial world, Vanguard was a powerful consortium of European and Asian tech investors. Only a very select handful of people knew that the sole controlling shareholder was the failed dropout son of the Harrison family. I had specifically targeted my family-failing logistics company when I saw the sheer scale of DeAndre's financial mismanagement. I did not want to destroy my grandfather's legacy. I wanted to excise the rot that had infected it. And the rot was DeAndre, enabled entirely by my father's blind pride and my mother's toxic favoritism. "What is our current exact position on their debt?" I asked, watching the towering city skyline roll past the tinted windows. "Vanguard currently holds $150 million in senior secured debt," Oliver recited perfectly. "We own the paper on their shipping fleet, their main distribution hubs, and the Beacon Hill mansion. The covenants on that loan are extremely tight, Nate. DeAndre agreed to an accelerated default clause if their corporate liquidity drops below $5 million for more than 48 hours. I was arrogant enough to think he could manipulate the cash flow indefinitely," I noted. "He has been moving money between accounts to make it look like they have the required liquidity." "Exactly," Oliver said. "But yesterday they missed a scheduled vendor payment of $400,000. Technically, they are already in breach of the loan covenants. I just have not filed the default notice with the courts yet." "Do not file it yet," I ordered, staring at the screen displaying the plunging stock projections for Harrison Logistics competitors. "I do not want to just bankrupt them immediately. I want them to feel the walls closing in. I want them to panic first." My personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was the Harrison family group chat. It was a chat I had not been active in for over a year, but I never left it just so I could monitor their daily delusions. DeAndre had just sent a message to the group, just had to clean out some trash from the boardroom. "The company is finally moving forward." Cassidy replied less than a minute later. "Thank God." He looked so pathetic in that cheap suit. He literally begged Dad for a job. Patricia added her usual fake sympathy. "I feel terrible for him, but we had to exercise tough love. He is just so lost. Maybe hitting rock bottom will force him to finally grow up." Richard sent the final message. The subject of Nathaniel is completely closed. DeAndre, have you secured the caterers for the Vanguard Gala next week? We need to impress their board. DeAndre answered immediately. Already done, boss. Top tier everything. Vanguard is going to love us. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, dark smile touching my lips. They were planning a massive, ridiculously expensive gala to impress me. They were going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. They did not have celebrating a bailout that was actually a carefully laid trap, all while publicly mocking the man who held their entire future in the palm of his hand. They thought they were kings of the city, completely unaware that the guillotine was already poised above their necks. Let them enjoy their victory lap, I told Oliver, setting the phone down on the console. DeAndre thinks he outsmarted the entire financial sector. He believes Vanguard is a faceless entity that simply hands out cash to anyone with a smooth pitch. He did not bother to read the fine print regarding the asset seizure protocols. He read it, Oliver corrected sharply. He just assumed he could outrun the consequences. Men like him always believe they are the smartest person in the room until the locks are changed on their doors. We have full authorization to seize the operational accounts the moment you give the green light. Keep everything primed, I instructed. I want the legal filings perfectly synchronized. When we pull the plug, I want it to happen simultaneously across all their banking institutions. They need to find out they are completely broke all at the exact same moment. It will be a synchronized financial blackout, Oliver assured me. I will have the team standing by. Enjoy your ride back to the office, Mr. Harrison. We have an empire to run. The line clicked off. I leaned my head against the plush leather headrest and closed my eyes. The engine of the Escalade hummed with a quiet, powerful energy as we merged onto the interstate. For years, my family had tried to make me feel small. They had weaponized their wealth, using it as a tool to control and humiliate me at every family gathering. They had built their entire identities on the illusion of superiority. But illusions are incredibly fragile things, and I was holding the hammer. Thorne pulled the armored Escalade into the loading dock of the Vanguard Tower. The heavy gates closed behind us, cutting off the noise of the Seattle streets. I stepped out into the brightly lit garage. My private elevator whisked me directly to the top floor. The doors opened to a sprawling penthouse office offering a panoramic view of the skyline. This was my sanctuary. This was the financial empire I built while my family believed I was rotting away in a damp basement. I walked to my desk and dropped my cell phone onto the polished surface. Immediately, the device began to vibrate incessantly. It danced across the wood, demanding my attention. I sat in my leather chair, steepled my fingers, and stared at the glowing screen. The Harrison family group chat was exploding with notifications. DeAndre was feeling victorious. He took my silent departure from the boardroom as a humiliating surrender. The text messages came through the chat in rapid succession, painting a pathetic picture of a man drunk on unearned power and divorced from reality. DeAndre wrote, "Hey Nate, checking if you made it back to your little hovel safely. Hope you did not walk too far in those cheap shoes. The offer for the security desk job is still on the table. You will get a crisp uniform and a shiny name tag. It is honest work for a guy who cannot handle the corporate leagues. Let me know before I hire someone else." The screen lit up again. DeAndre was not finished gloating. DeAndre added, "I am taking your sister out to celebrate our victory tonight. The company credit card is paying for top-shelf champagne. You should see the venue I booked for the Vanguard Gala next week. We are flying in executive chefs from Paris. I told your father it is a necessary investment. We have to look like billionaires to play with billionaires. Vanguard will be begging to give us more money." The arrogance of him bragging about spending Vanguard money to impress Vanguard executives was almost beautifully poetic. He was swiping a corporate credit card that drew from an account I controlled. Cassidy quickly chimed into the group chat, eager to add her toxic venom. Cassidy wrote, "Honestly, Nate, you completely embarrassed us today. Showing up to a board meeting looking like you rolled out of bed is pathetic. DeAndre is working trying to save this family, and you act like a spoiled child. I am heading to Fifth Avenue to buy a designer dress for the gala. Dad increased my allowance since the funding came through. You should think about growing up and apologizing to DeAndre." I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. They were spending money that did not exist. My father had authorized an allowance increase based on a temporary bridge loan tied to strict metrics they had already violated. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, tossing cash into the ocean. Then came the direct message. A notification popped up from my mother, Patricia. She needed to wield her specific brand of emotional manipulation directly. She needed to feel like the suffering savior dealing with a tragically broken son. Patricia wrote, "Nathaniel, my heart is breaking for you today. I hope you understand why your father did what he did. We love you so much, but you have always lacked the drive your sister has. You have been struggling for years, and it is exhausting to constantly carry your dead weight. DeAndre is a blessing to this company. If you swallow your pride, come back to the house and apologize to him and your father. I can talk them into giving you a small stipend. Please let us help you find reality." The gaslighting was truly masterful. She ignored the fact they had just attempted to extort me out of millions. She reframed their hostile takeover as an act of maternal tough love. She demanded I apologize to the man actively draining my grandfather's legacy dry. She wanted me to beg for scraps from my own table. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. A younger version of me, the boy who desperately wanted his parents to love him, might have typed a furious emotional response. I might have defended myself against their cruel accusations. I might have listed my achievements, screamed about my billion-dollar valuation, and demanded their respect. But that desperate man was entirely dead. They had killed him a very long time ago. I did not type a single word. I did not block their numbers. I did not leave the family group chat. I simply sat there in my penthouse office and let the cold silence speak for itself. I read every toxic message, absorbing their cruelty, their blind arrogance, and their profound stupidity. I used every manipulative word as fuel to eradicate any lingering shred of familial guilt I might have harbored deep inside. The silence was my greatest weapon. By refusing to respond, I denied them the dramatic conflict they desperately craved. DeAndre wanted a vicious fight so he could prove his dominance. Cassidy wanted an argument so she could confidently play the superior sibling. Patricia wanted me to break down and beg so she could feel like a benevolent matriarch dispensing charity. I gave them absolutely nothing. My silence would let them build their false confidence to the maximum height. The higher they blindly climbed on their mountain of delusion, the more devastating the impact would be when I completely removed the structural foundation from beneath their feet. I turned away from the phone and pressed the intercom button. My assistant answered, "Yes, Mr. Harrison." "Get Oliver on the secure line right now," I instructed, my voice sharp, cold, and decisive. "Tell him we are moving to the next phase of the operation. I want the secondary credit lines severed. Let the corporate games begin today." The intercom clicked off. The secure console on my desk chimed. I picked up the receiver to hear Oliver already on the line, his tone brisk and focused. "You gave the signal," Oliver said. "The Sterling Bank executive team is holding on a secure channel. We are ready to initiate the total freeze on the secondary revolving credit facilities for Harrison Logistics. I just need your final verbal authorization to cut them off completely." "Do it," I commanded. "Execute the freeze on every corporate card, emergency fund, and executive expense account tied to Richard and DeAndre. Leave them with absolute zero liquidity." "Understood," Oliver replied. "The banking algorithms are updating now. The master account is officially locked due to the missed vendor payment covenant violation. Any swipe, wire transfer, or withdrawal attempt by a Harrison Logistics executive will return an immediate code for insufficient funds." I pulled up the financial dashboard on my monitor. As CEO of Vanguard Holdings, I had unrestricted access to the real-time transaction logs of our subsidiary banks. I watched as the active status indicators next to the Harrison Logistics corporate accounts blinked from green to a harsh red. It was done. The financial oxygen supply to my family was severed. "What happens on their end?" I asked, watching the lights pulse. "Right now, nothing," Oliver explained. "They will not receive formal notification for 24 hours. The bank must send a certified letter regarding the covenant breach. But we scheduled the automated system to delay the digital alert until tomorrow morning. They are flying blind. They will only find out they are broke when they actually try to spend money. And they will try to spend money very soon," I said. DeAndre just bragged about taking my sister out for expensive champagne and finalizing catering deposits for their ridiculous gala. He is going to swipe that black card today. Then he is going to have a very embarrassing afternoon, Oliver noted. Should I have our legal team prepare the preliminary asset seizure documents? Draft them, but keep them completely sealed, I instructed. We wait for them to make a desperate move. DeAndre will panic when the bank cuts him off. He will try to find cash somewhere else to cover his tracks and hide the liquidity crisis from my father. I ended the call and stood up, walking over to the floor to ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. Somewhere down there in the Harrison Logistics building, the initial waves of a massive corporate heart attack were quietly beginning to ripple through the accounting department. My secure tablet buzzed with an encrypted text message from Caldwell. As my inside man, he had full access to their executive floor. Caldwell wrote the catering company just called the main reception desk. They tried to run the $50,000 deposit for the Vanguard Gala. The transaction was declined. The head caterer is demanding to speak with DeAndre immediately. I smiled. The first domino had officially fallen. Keep me updated on his exact reaction, I typed back. Do not intervene. Let them scramble. For 2 hours, I sat in my office and watched the live transaction log on my monitor. It was like watching a rat trapped in a maze hitting dead ends. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a charge for $1,200 at an upscale downtown boutique was attempted on Cassidy's corporate expense card, declined. At 1:22 a second attempt was made for the same amount this time, using a different billing zip code, declined. At 1:45, a charge for $400 at a luxury steakhouse was attempted on DeAndre's primary executive card, declined. At 1:47, the same steakhouse charge was attempted on his backup corporate card. Declined. My tablet buzzed again. Caldwell was delivering the play-by-play from inside the sinking ship. Caldwell wrote DeAndre just stormed into the accounting department. He is screaming at the chief financial officer. He claims Sterling Bank is having a system-wide server outage. He ordered the CFO to wire the catering deposit manually from the payroll reserve account. I shook my head at his staggering incompetence. Bypassing the operational budget to wire funds from a highly regulated payroll reserve was not just a violation of standard corporate policy, it was a massive breach of federal labor laws. DeAndre was desperate to hide the declined cards from my father, willing to commit blatant financial fraud. The CFO refused the order, Caldwell wrote in a follow-up message. He told DeAndre the payroll reserve is locked and requires dual authorization from your father. DeAndre threw a stapler at the wall and stormed into his private office. He locked the door. I was trapped. The illusion of his genius was fracturing. He convinced my father that his connection to Vanguard Holdings was a golden ticket, a limitless supply of capital, elevating their family into the billionaire class. Instead, he was currently sitting in a locked office, sweating through his custom-tailored suit, completely unable to pay for a business lunch or a catering deposit. The true beauty of the trap was the absolute isolation it created. DeAndre could not go to my father and admit the accounts were frozen. Doing so would expose his reckless mismanagement and prove that his bridge loan was a complete failure. He could not go to the bank because the bank was owned by the very private equity firm he was trying to impress. He was fenced in, suffocating under his own arrogance. I watched the log record another declined swipe. It was an attempted cash advance from a corporate ATM. DeAndre was hunting for literal cash to cover his tracks. I knew his next move. A desperate man with zero liquidity and a massive ego always defaults to his oldest tricks. He would attempt to bully the small businesses they worked with, forcing them to extend unauthorized credit lines to cover his immediate expenses. He would try to leverage the Harrison name to get what he wanted for free. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Oliver again. The operation was accelerating faster than anticipated, and I needed to tighten the noose before DeAndre could find a temporary loophole. Oliver, I said as soon as he answered. DeAndre is trying to bypass the frozen accounts. He is going to start hitting up our subsidiary vendors for unauthorized credit extensions. Send a highly confidential advisory to every single business within the Vanguard network. What is the directive? Oliver asked. Inform them that Harrison Logistics is currently under a severe credit watch, I commanded. Instruct every vendor contractor and partner agency to immediately deny any requests for extended payment terms favors or delayed invoicing from DeAndre or Richard. Cash up front or no service. We are shutting down every possible exit. I hung up the phone and looked back out at the city. My parents had banished me to protect their perfect hollow empire. They had chosen a slick, manipulative fraud over their own son. Now they were about to discover what happens when you hand the keys of a sinking ship to a man who only knows how to steal the life rafts. The panic had officially begun, and I had a front row seat to the destruction. The intercom clicked off. The secure console on my desk chimed. I picked up the receiver to hear Oliver already on the line, his tone brisk and focused. "You gave the signal," Oliver said. "The bank executive team is holding on a secure channel. We are ready to initiate the total freeze on the secondary revolving credit facilities for Harrison Logistics. I just need your final verbal authorization to cut them off completely." "Do it," I commanded. "Execute the freeze on every corporate card, emergency fund, and executive expense account tied to Richard and DeAndre. Leave them with absolute zero liquidity." "Understood," Oliver replied. "The banking algorithms are updating now. The master account is officially locked due to the missed vendor payment covenant violation. Any swipe wire transfer or withdrawal attempt by a Harrison Logistics executive will return an immediate code for insufficient funds." I pulled up the financial dashboard on my monitor. As CEO of Vanguard Holdings, I had unrestricted access to the real-time transaction logs of our subsidiary banks. I watched as the active status indicators next to the Harrison Logistics corporate accounts blinked from green to a harsh red. It was done. The financial oxygen supply to my family was severed. "What happens on their end?" I asked, watching the lights pulse. "Right now, nothing," Oliver explained. "They will not receive formal notification for 24 hours. The bank must send a certified letter regarding the covenant breach, but we scheduled the automated system to delay the digital alert until tomorrow morning. They are flying blind. They will only find out they are broke when they actually try to spend money. And they will try to spend money very soon," I said. DeAndre just bragged about taking my sister out for expensive champagne and finalizing catering deposits for their ridiculous gala. He is going to swipe that black card today. Then he is going to have a very embarrassing afternoon, Oliver noted. "Should I have our legal team prepare the preliminary asset seizure documents? Draft them but keep them completely sealed," I instructed. "We wait for them to make a desperate move. DeAndre will panic when the bank cuts him off. He will try to find cash somewhere else to cover his tracks and hide the liquidity crisis from my father." I ended the call and stood up, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. Somewhere down there in the Harrison Logistics building, the initial waves of a massive corporate heart attack were quietly beginning to ripple through the accounting department. My secure tablet vibrated against the mahogany grain of my desk. Caldwell was feeding me live updates from the executive floor of Harrison Logistics. DeAndre was spiraling. A man accustomed to throwing money at his problems suddenly found himself locked out of the vault. Unable to fix his financial paralysis and terrified of my father discovering the frozen accounts, DeAndre needed a punching bag. He needed to feel powerful again. He needed a victim. Naturally, he chose me. Caldwell sent a rapid succession of encrypted messages. "He is pacing his office like a caged animal," Caldwell wrote. "He just accessed your old family background check file. He is looking at the employment section. He found the listing for Zenith Digital Solutions. He is picking up his desk phone." I let out a soft laugh. Zenith Digital Solutions was a mid-sized tech consulting firm based in downtown Seattle. To my family, it was the mediocre freelance agency where I supposedly scraped together a pathetic living designing basic corporate websites. They loved mocking my imaginary position there. What they entirely failed to comprehend was that Zenith Digital Solutions was a wholly owned subsidiary shell company operating under the Vanguard Holdings umbrella. I did not work for Zenith. I owned the entire corporate structure. "Oliver," I said, pressing the intercom button. "DeAndre is calling Zenith Digital Solutions right now. He is going to try to get me fired. Reroute his incoming call from the Zenith reception desk directly to your line. Put him on the office speaker. Let us listen to the golden boy try to flex his non-existent muscles." "With pleasure," Oliver replied. The connection clicked, and a low, static hum filled my penthouse office. A second later, the sharp ringing of a transferred call echoed through the room. Oliver answered with perfect corporate detachment. Zenith Digital Solutions. This is the executive director speaking. How may I direct your inquiry? DeAndre did not bother with pleasantries. He launched straight into his aggressive alpha male routine, his deep voice dripping with unearned authority. Listen to me very carefully, DeAndre barked over the speakerphone. This is DeAndre Washington. I am the incoming Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Logistics. We are a massive player in the supply chain sector. You have a low-level contractor named Nathaniel Harrison working for your agency. I am calling to inform you that he is a liability to your reputation. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my glass of sparkling water, absolutely captivated by the sheer audacity of his delusion. He was penniless, trapped in a failing company, completely locked out of his own credit cards, and his immediate priority was trying to ruin my imaginary livelihood. I see, Oliver said, his British accent smooth and completely unbothered. And what exactly makes Mr. Harrison a liability, Mr. Washington? He is toxic, DeAndre stated, practically spitting the words. He is a fraud who lacks basic corporate integrity. He just tried to extort my family board of directors. Harrison Logistics does a significant amount of outsourcing for digital infrastructure. We have millions of dollars in upcoming tech contracts. I was considering tossing some of that capital your way, but I refuse to do business with any agency that employs Nathaniel Harrison. You fire him today, and I will ensure your firm gets a massive piece of our new development budget. You keep him, and I will personally blacklist Zenith Digital Solutions across the entire Pacific Northwest supply chain network. It was a classic corporate shakedown, pure manipulation disguised as a lucrative business opportunity. DeAndre was leveraging money he did not possess to destroy a career I did not actually have. Oliver paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make DeAndre uncomfortable. The psychological warfare was exquisite. Mr. Washington, Oliver began, his tone shifting from polite receptionist to absolute ice. Let me clarify your current proposal. You are demanding the termination of one of our personnel in exchange for future contracts with Harrison Logistics. Is that correct? That is exactly what I am saying. DeAndre snapped, clearly annoyed that his intimidation tactics were not working faster. Cut him loose or you lose our money. It is basic business. I find that fascinating, Oliver replied smoothly. Because according to our financial database, Harrison Logistics does not have any money to offer us. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. DeAndre went completely silent. What are you talking about? DeAndre demanded, his voice suddenly losing its aggressive edge. We are backed by Vanguard Holdings. We have hundreds of millions in capital. Actually, Oliver corrected, his words precise and devastating. My system indicates that Harrison Logistics is currently flagged for a severe Tier 1 credit default. Every secondary line of credit associated with your corporate profile has been permanently severed. Your executive accounts are frozen due to insufficient liquidity. Furthermore, Zenith Digital Solutions is a subsidiary of the Vanguard Holdings network. We were notified 20 minutes ago to deny all services to your company. You cannot blacklist us, Mr. Washington, because you do not have the financial clearance to buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone dictate corporate policy to our firm. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I could vividly picture DeAndre standing in his office, his face draining of color as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He thought he was calling a helpless middle manager to ruin my life. Instead, he had just been informed by a total stranger that his own corporate empire was completely bankrupt. This is some kind of mistake, DeAndre stammered, the smooth arrogance entirely gone from his voice. There is a glitch with our bank. It is a technical error. Banks do not make technical errors regarding Tier 1 covenant defaults, Oliver stated ruthlessly. We do not do business with insolvent entities. And we certainly do not terminate our highly valued personnel based on the desperate threats of a man who cannot even authorize a catering deposit. Now, unless you have a valid payment method to clear your delinquent status, this conversation is over. Do not you dare hang up on me, DeAndre shouted, sheer panic finally breaking through his facade. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Oliver said. You are a man with zero liquidity. Have a terrible afternoon. Oliver severed the connection. The line went dead. I sat in my penthouse office and let out a long, slow breath. The satisfaction was overwhelming. DeAndre had tried to orchestrate my downfall using the very power I had secretly stripped from him. He had swung a sword that no longer existed and ended up slicing his own throat. My secure tablet lit up with a new message from Caldwell. He just smashed his office phone to pieces against his desk, Caldwell wrote. He is tearing his files apart. He knows he is trapped. Cassidy just knocked on his door, and he screamed at her to go away. Excellent, I typed back. Let him stew in his own failure. He is realizing that his smooth-talking manipulation cannot fix a frozen bank account. Keep the perimeter locked. The real show is just beginning. I closed the tablet and turned back to the window. The first strike was a total success. My family had spent my entire life trying to prove how small and insignificant I was. They had forced me into the shadows. Now, from those exact shadows, I was going to dismantle their entire world brick by brick. DeAndre thought he could crush me with a single phone call. He was about to find out that I owned the phone line, the bank, and the ground he was standing on. That evening, I decided to reward myself for a highly successful week. I secured a reservation at Le Jardin, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Seattle. Securing a table there usually required 6 months of advance notice. I owned the commercial real estate building that housed the restaurant, granting me the premier corner booth overlooking the Puget Sound whenever I desired. I sat alone, nursing a glass of vintage Bordeaux, watching the city lights reflect off the dark water. The atmosphere was a masterclass in quiet luxury. Soft jazz played in the background, blending with the muted clinking of crystal and silver. It was the perfect environment to reflect on the absolute panic currently consuming the executive suite. Oliver had confirmed an hour earlier that the secondary credit freeze remained fully active. The bank had not yet sent the formal default notices, leaving my family in a state of suspended animation. They were terrified, confused, and desperately trying to maintain the illusion of their wealth. Right on cue, the heavy velvet curtains at the front entrance parted. The chaotic energy that spilled into the serene dining room was instantly recognizable. I took a slow sip of my wine and watched the spectacle unfold. DeAndre and Cassidy stormed into the reception area. They were dressed in absurdly flashy designer clothing, vibrating with toxic entitlement. DeAndre wore a velvet dinner jacket, while my sister dragged a massive fur coat behind her. They were loud, arrogant, and completely oblivious to the annoyed glances from the surrounding tables. They marched directly up to the maitre d' named Henri. "We need your best table immediately," DeAndre announced, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "We are celebrating a massive corporate acquisition. Put it on the Harrison Logistics corporate tab." Henri maintained his professional smile, scanning his reservation book. "I apologize, sir, but we are fully committed this evening. We do not have a single table available." Cassidy scoffed, crossing her arms and stepping closer to the podium. "You do not understand who we are. We are the Harrisons. We practically own the logistics sector in this city. Find a table. Kick someone out if you have to. We are prepared to spend heavily tonight." I watched DeAndre pull his leather wallet from his jacket. He extracted the sleek black corporate credit card, the exact same card I had personally frozen that morning. He slammed it down on the podium. "Make it happen," DeAndre ordered. "Bring us your most expensive champagne while we wait." Henri looked at the card, utterly unimpressed by the aggressive display. "Sir, I must politely inform you that even with unlimited funds, we simply do not have the physical space. Our dining room is at maximum capacity." Cassidy let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh. She turned away from the podium, scanning the dining room. Her eyes swept past the wealthy couples before suddenly locking directly onto me. I raised my glass slightly, acknowledging her gaze with a cold, blank expression. Cassidy froze. Her jaw actually dropped. She grabbed DeAndre by the arm and pointed violently in my direction. "Look at that!" Cassidy hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "He is here. The absolute nerve of him showing his face in a place like this." DeAndre followed her. When he saw me sitting comfortably at the premier corner booth, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. The humiliation he had suffered in his locked office that afternoon clearly demanded an outlet. He saw my solitary presence at the best table in the house as a personal insult. They shoved past the protesting maitre d' and marched straight across the dining room, navigating aggressively through the tight spaces between tables. I placed my wine glass down gently and waited. Well, 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 DeAndre said, arriving at my table and placing his hands heavily on the white linen cloth. Look who decided to spend his last pathetic savings on a pity dinner. Did you beg the chef for leftovers? Nate Cassidy stood right behind him, glaring at my perfectly plated meal. How did you even get in here? She demanded. This place requires a massive deposit just to hold a reservation. Did you steal money from Mom before you stormed out of the boardroom? I picked up my linen napkin, dabbed my mouth, and looked up at them. I am having a private dinner, Cassidy. You are disturbing my peace. Your peace, DeAndre laughed loudly, drawing more irritated stares from the neighboring patrons. You do not get peace. You are a complete failure who just lost his family and his shares. And you are sitting at a table that is entirely too large for one pathetic loser. He turned around and snapped his fingers at Henri, who had followed them across the room. Manager DeAndre barked. This man is a hostile former employee of our company. He is currently harassing us. I want him removed from the premises immediately, and we will be taking this table. Henri looked at me, his eyes wide with horror at their behavior. He opened his mouth to defend me, knowing exactly who I was, but I caught his eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I wanted them to keep digging. I wanted them to bury themselves so deep they would never see the sunlight again, sir, Henri said carefully, trying to de-escalate the situation. This gentleman is a highly valued guest. I cannot simply remove him because you demand it. DeAndre pulled the black corporate card out again and tossed it directly onto my plate. It landed with a soft clatter next to my truffle risotto. I am taking over his bill, DeAndre announced to Henri. I am paying for whatever cheap garbage he ordered, and I am putting a $5,000 tip on top of it. Now box up his food and get him out of my sight. We are celebrating, and this failure is ruining our atmosphere. I stared at the piece of black plastic resting against the rim of my porcelain plate. The corporate credit card sat there like a monument to his supreme ignorance. A heavy silence descended upon our immediate area. The surrounding patrons had completely stopped their conversations. They were watching the spectacle with wide eyes. DeAndre reveled in the attention. He thrived on the audience. He adjusted his velvet jacket and deliberately pulled back his left cuff. The movement was entirely calculated to flash the heavy gold timepiece strapped to his wrist. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a masterpiece of Swiss engineering. It was also a masterpiece of corporate embezzlement. I knew the exact retail value of that watch. I knew exactly which employee pension overflow fund had been drained to purchase it. He wore the retirement security of 30 warehouse workers on his wrist and flaunted it like a trophy of his own genius. Do you like the watch? DeAndre asked, catching my gaze. He held his wrist up slightly, letting the ambient restaurant lighting catch the gold bezel. It is a reward for real corporate leadership. Something you will never understand. When you actually save a dying company, they let you enjoy the fruits of your labor. Consider this dinner a charity donation from the new king of Harrison Logistics. Take the box of scraps and get out. Cassidy crossed her arms and leaned against the leather upholstery of the adjacent empty chair. You should be thanking him, she snapped. You could not afford to smell the food in this place on your own. Take the free meal and walk away before you embarrass yourself further. Mom and Dad are not here to pity you anymore. You are cut off. Let the real adults handle the business. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I slowly picked up my linen napkin and wiped my hands. Then I reached forward and picked up the black corporate card with 2 fingers. I held it up to the light. Henri stood frozen beside the table. He looked absolutely terrified. He knew I owned the building. He knew I could have security throw this loud, obnoxious couple onto the pavement in seconds. But I raised my free hand and gave Henri a quick, sharp wave of dismissal. I wanted to handle this personally. Henri bowed his head slightly and stepped back into the shadows of the dining room, leaving us alone in the spotlight DeAndre had so desperately demanded. I placed the credit card back on the table and slid it an inch toward DeAndre. You are offering to buy the poor boy dinner, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that forced them to lean in to hear me. That is incredibly generous of you, DeAndre. But you seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth actually works. Wealth is quiet. Wealth does not need to scream across a dining room to prove it exists. What you are doing right now is broadcasting your absolute desperation. DeAndre slammed his fist on the table, rattling my silverware. I am not desperate. I am the man who just secured $150 million in capital. I am the man taking over the empire. You are a washed-up failure eating alone. Run the card, he shouted toward the shadows where Henri had retreated. I kept my eyes locked on DeAndre. The anger in his face was a thin veil over his deep-seated insecurity. He needed me to fold. He needed me to cower to validate his stolen crown. That watch on your wrist. I continued, ignoring his outburst entirely. It is a beautiful piece, but it is incredibly heavy, is it not? It weighs you down. Because you did not earn it. You stole it from the pension reserve account. Just like you stole the $12 million you funneled into those offshore shell companies. The color drained from DeAndre's face. His arrogant sneer vanished instantly. His eyes darted frantically around the room, suddenly terrified that someone might have heard my precise accusation. Cassidy looked at him in confusion, not entirely understanding the financial mechanics, but sensing the sudden shift in her husband's demeanor. "What did you just say?" DeAndre whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden, poorly concealed panic. I leaned forward across the table. I invaded his space, lowering my voice even further until it was nothing but a lethal promise. "I said you are playing a game with rules you do not comprehend," I replied smoothly. "You think you secured a lifeline today. You think Vanguard Holdings gave you a bridge loan because they believe in your vision. But Vanguard does not invest in failing logistics companies run by incompetent thieves. They buy debt to acquire assets. They handed you a rope and you eagerly tied it around your own neck." DeAndre swallowed hard. The confidence had completely evaporated from his posture. He took a step back, bumping into Cassidy. "You are crazy," Cassidy interjected, though her voice lacked its previous venom. She looked at her husband for reassurance, but DeAndre was staring at me like he had just seen a ghost. "Nate is just jealous. Let us go to another restaurant. This place is terrible anyway." I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch, amplifying his growing terror. "Leave the card on the table, DeAndre," I said, gesturing to the black plastic square. "Go ahead and tell the maitre d' to run it for my dinner. Tell him to add your massive $5,000 tip. But before you do that, I want you to remember this exact warning." I placed the wineglass down and folded my hands. "That piece of plastic is completely dead," I stated with absolute chilling certainty. "The accounts are frozen. The credit lines are severed. You cannot buy my dinner because you cannot even afford the fabric of the suit you are currently wearing. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and realize your corporate kingdom has vanished into thin air, I want you to remember that I sat here and told you exactly how it was going to end." DeAndre stared at the credit card on the table. His chest heaved as he tried to process my words. He wanted to scream at me again. He wanted to command Henri to swipe the card and prove me wrong. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly into overwhelming dread. He remembered the declined catering deposit from earlier in the afternoon. He remembered the locked payroll reserve. The pieces were slowly coming together in his mind, forming a picture of total financial annihilation. "Take your wife and walk out of this restaurant," I commanded, my voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Before you make a fool of yourself in front of the entire city." DeAndre did not say a single word. He reached out with a shaking hand and snatched the corporate card off the table. He turned on his heel and grabbed Cassidy by the arm, dragging her roughly toward the exit. She stumbled in her high heels, complaining loudly about his grip, but he ignored her. He practically sprinted through the velvet curtains, fleeing the restaurant as fast as his legs could carry him. I watched them disappear into the night. The dining room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The quiet chatter resumed, and the jazz music filled the air once more. Henri approached my table with a fresh bottle of wine, bowing respectfully. "I apologize for the disturbance," Sir Henri said softly. "There is no need to apologize, Henri," I replied, picking up my fork to finish my risotto. The trash just took itself out. I took another bite of my meal, savoring the rich flavor of the truffles. The brief encounter had provided me with everything I needed to know. DeAndre was cracking under the pressure. The psychological warfare was working flawlessly. He would spend the entire night tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his perfect grift had suddenly turned into a nightmare. He would try to access the banking portals from his phone in the back of his luxury car. He would see the glowing red error messages and the locked-out screens. He would realize that my cryptic warning was not a desperate bluff from a defeated man, but a factual statement from the executioner. Cassidy would complain the entire ride home about my behavior. She would demand that DeAndre call our father and have me punished further. But DeAndre would not make that call. He would be too paralyzed by the fear of exposure to risk a conversation with the chairman. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always make fatal mistakes. I signaled Henri for the check. I paid the bill with my personal black card, leaving a generous gratuity for his impeccable discretion during the confrontation. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air. My driver Thorne was waiting by the curb with the armored SUV. He opened the door and I climbed into the mobile command center. The screens were actively tracking the stock futures and the holding companies associated with Harrison Logistics. The numbers were glowing with fatal, undeniable clarity. "Take me home, Thorne," I instructed. "Tomorrow is going to be an exceptionally busy day." The engine roared to life, and the heavy vehicle merged into the city traffic. I looked out the tinted window at the towering skyscrapers. My family believed they were untouchable. They believed their name shielded them from the consequences of their relentless cruelty and staggering financial crimes. They had spent my entire life trying to convince me that I was fundamentally worthless. They had excluded me, mocked me, and finally attempted to discard me like refuse. But they had made one critical, unforgivable miscalculation. They assumed I was fighting for a seat at their table. They did not understand that I had already bought the entire building. The final act was approaching rapidly, and I was ready to drop the curtain on their fraudulent empire. The next morning arrived with a false sense of triumph for the Harrison family. At 9 o'clock sharp, Oliver executed the next phase of our trap. He authorized a shadow transfer that appeared as a massive capital injection into the Harrison Logistics primary holding account. To my father and DeAndre, it looked like a miraculous $150 million bailout had officially cleared from their anonymous saviors at Vanguard Holdings. They had no idea the funds were entirely restricted, locked behind a labyrinth of smart contracts and immediate clawback clauses. It was a digital mirage designed to inflate their egos right before the execution. My tablet buzzed with intercepted internal emails. The entire executive floor was actively celebrating. DeAndre was taking full credit for saving the company, strutting through the hallways like a conquering hero. With their artificial liquidity seemingly restored, their first instinct was not to pay their struggling vendors or secure their crumbling supply chains. Instead, they immediately doubled down on their sheer arrogance. Patricia sent an urgent broadcast to the family group chat, demanding everyone clear their schedules for the upcoming weekend. The Vanguard Gala was officially moving forward. They booked the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons, ordering custom floral arrangements, and securing a luxury catering team. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single night of extreme vanity. The invitations were rapidly dispatched to the city elite, promising a historic announcement regarding the future leadership of Harrison Logistics. They were throwing a massive party to impress the very private equity firm that was currently tightening a financial noose around their throats. Caldwell forwarded me the confidential agenda for the gala. The highlight of the evening was a formal passing of the torch. Richard was stepping down as chairman to officially name DeAndre as the new chief executive officer. My father was handing the keys of our grandfather's legacy to the exact man who had systematically pillaged it. DeAndre had convinced my parents that his aggressive business acumen was the sole reason Vanguard Holdings had invested in them. I desperately needed the CEO title to solidify his grift before anyone could look too closely at the empty offshore accounts. He wanted the crown and my parents were eagerly polishing it for him. I sat at my desk and reviewed the finalized asset seizure documents Oliver had meticulously prepared. The sharp contrast between their deep delusion and my absolute reality was striking. They were currently picking out designer tuxedos and writing self-congratulatory speeches to feed their narcissism. I was finalizing the legal paperwork that would legally strip them of their homes, their cars, and their false identities. The Vanguard Gala wasn't intended to be their ultimate coronation. Instead, it was going to be their immediate public execution. I instructed Oliver to have my bespoke suit pressed and ready. I was not invited to their lavish celebration, but I was absolutely going to attend and claim my rightful throne. The evening of the Vanguard Gala arrived with a crisp winter chill. Thorne pulled the armored Escalade right up to the valet podium at the Four Seasons. I stepped out into the flashing lights of hired photographers. I was not wearing the cheap department store clothes my family was accustomed to mocking. I wore a $15,000 bespoke suit tailored specifically for this night in Milan. The charcoal fabric draped perfectly over my shoulders, projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying power. I walked past the velvet ropes and handed my coat to a stunned attendant. The grand ballroom was a sickening display of unearned luxury. Crystal chandeliers illuminated ice sculptures, towering floral arrangements, and tables draped in imported silk. My family was spending my money with reckless abandon. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, overlooking the massive crowd of Seattle elite. It only took 30 seconds for my mother to notice my presence. Patricia was holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly with a group of local socialites. Her eyes drifted up to the staircase, and the color instantly drained from her face. She dropped her crystal flute. It shattered against the marble floor, but she did not even look down. She excused herself frantically and practically sprinted up the stairs toward me. Her face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. "What are you doing here?" Patricia hissed, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me toward the service hallway. "You are not on the guest list. You need to leave right now before you ruin the most important night of our lives." I calmly removed her shaking hand from my sleeve. "I am simply attending a corporate event, Patricia. I hear the new leadership is making a major announcement tonight. I would not miss it for the world." "You are going to embarrass DeAndre," she whispered desperately, looking over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching. "He is about to be named CEO. Vanguard executives are in this room. If they see you crashing this party looking for a handout, they will pull our funding. Get out." I smoothed my lapel. "Vanguard executives are indeed in this room, and I guarantee they are highly interested in my presence." My father finally noticed the commotion. Richard marched heavily up the stairs, his face dark with that familiar explosive anger. He stopped mere inches from my chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "I told you to never show your face around my business again." Richard growled, his voice vibrating with absolute rage. "You have absolutely no right to be here. You are a complete disgrace to the Harrison name." I stared back at him with dead, empty eyes. "You invited the wealthy investors who saved your failing company, Richard. I am just making sure the investment is sound." My father sneered. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers toward the entrance. "Security, get over here and remove this pathetic trespasser immediately." Two uniformed guards immediately stepped forward from the shadows of the arched doorway, responding to my father's aggressive command. But before they could even reach the bottom of the grand staircase, a tall figure materialized from the crowd. Mr. Caldwell stepped into the light, raising a single hand. The guards stopped dead in their tracks, recognizing the head of corporate security. Caldwell looked up at my father and shook his head slightly, communicating a clear message to avoid a messy public scene. My father scowled, but slowly lowered his hand, terrified of creating a scandal in front of the Vanguard executives he desperately wanted to impress today. "I am warning you," Richard hissed, his face red with suppressed rage. "Stand in the back and keep your mouth completely shut. If you do anything to ruin DeAndre's moment tonight, I will destroy whatever pathetic life you have left." He turned and marched back down the stairs with Patricia rushing anxiously behind him. I smoothed my jacket and walked down the steps at my own pace, weaving through the thick crowd of oblivious socialites and corporate sharks. The bright lights in the grand ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the main event. A spotlight hit the center stage, illuminating the polished podium. DeAndre strutted up the steps to the stage, beaming with unmatched arrogance. He wore a custom white tuxedo jacket, looking every bit the conquering king. The audience erupted into polite applause as he tapped the microphone loudly. "Thank you all for being here tonight," DeAndre began, his deep voice echoing across the silent room. "We are gathered to celebrate a historic milestone for Harrison Logistics. When I joined this incredible family, I saw a legacy that needed modernizing. I saw untapped potential. We secured massive backing from Vanguard Holdings because they recognized true leadership. They saw a man who knows how to win." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked directly onto me, standing in the back of the room. A cruel, triumphant smirk spread across his face. "Family is about dedication," DeAndre continued, leaning into the microphone. "It is about the people who actually contribute, who build the empire. It is not about those who expect free handouts. We all know that true success requires cutting dead weight. Family is built by those who work for it, not by absolute failures who stand in the corner hoping for a charity check." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter echoed through the audience. People turned their heads, trying to spot the loser DeAndre was publicly shaming. I stood perfectly still, letting his arrogant words wash over me. He was digging his own grave in front of the entire city elite. Across the ballroom, standing near the main exit, Caldwell caught my eye. He reached up and adjusted his tie, nodding exactly once. It was our predetermined signal. The final legal locks were firmly in place. The trap was permanently sealed. My family had run out of time. I did not stay for the champagne toast. The moment Caldwell gave the signal, I turned my back on the ballroom and walked out into the freezing Seattle night. DeAndre was busy soaking in the applause, completely unaware that he had just celebrated the final hours of his false kingdom. I went back to my penthouse, slept for precisely 6 hours, and woke up ready to dismantle their entire reality. The next morning, the clock on my dashboard read exactly 7:45 when Thorne pulled the armored SUV up to the main entrance of the Harrison Logistics building. The morning sun was pale, reflecting off the towering glass facade my grandfather had built. I stepped out wearing a sharp navy suit, carrying absolutely nothing. I did not need briefcases or printed contracts. I brought my own executioner. I walked through the revolving doors and strode purposefully across the marble lobby. The junior security guards at the front desk had already received their new operational directives from Caldwell. Instead of stopping me, they immediately stepped aside and swiped their master access cards to open the private executive elevator. I rode up in total silence, watching the floor numbers climb higher and higher. When the doors opened on the top floor, the administrative assistants were just beginning to arrive, brewing coffee and organizing files for the highly anticipated board meeting. They stared at me in absolute shock. They had all witnessed my humiliating eviction just 24 hours ago. Now I was walking past their desks with the commanding authority of a man who owned the very air they were breathing. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the primary boardroom. The room was empty. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the massive polished table. At the far end of the room sat the oversized leather executive chair, the chairman's seat. It was the throne my father had occupied for 2 decades, the seat he was officially preparing to hand over to DeAndre this morning to finalize the corporate transition. I walked the length of the table. I pulled the heavy leather chair back and sat down directly in it. I rested my arms on the smooth wooden armrests, leaned back, and waited. The power dynamic of the room shifted instantly just by my presence in that specific chair. I felt a profound sense of calm. The storm was here. At exactly 8 o'clock, the boardroom doors swung wide open. Loud, booming laughter echoed from the hallway. DeAndre walked in first, holding a cup of premium coffee, still wearing a smug, victorious grin from the gala last night. Richard followed closely behind him, clapping DeAndre on the shoulder. Patricia and Cassidy trailed them, chatting animatedly about the socialites they had impressed at the party. They were so engrossed in their own vanity that it took them a full 5 seconds to realize someone was sitting at the head of the table. DeAndre froze mid-sentence. His coffee cup tilted dangerously in his hand. Richard bumped into his back, letting out an annoyed grunt before looking up. The color instantly drained from my father's face, rapidly replaced by a violently dark shade of crimson. Cassidy let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. Patricia just stared, her eyes wide with total disbelief. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany. I steepled my fingers and offered them a very small, utterly humorless smile. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the stunned silence. "Please take a seat. We have a lot of corporate restructuring to discuss today." "Are you completely insane?" Richard roared, his voice shaking the glass partitions. He marched forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Get out of my chair right this second. I told you yesterday if you ever stepped foot in this building again, I would have you thrown in a police cruiser." DeAndre quickly recovered from his initial shock, puffing out his chest and stepping up beside my father. "You really do not know when to quit, do you, Nate?" DeAndre sneered. "You crashed my gala last night and now you break into the building. Security is going to drag you out of here by your hair. You are officially trespassing." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my gaze locked on my father. "It is 8 o'clock, Richard. You scheduled a board meeting to formalize the transition of power. I am simply making sure the transition happens exactly as planned." Patricia rushed forward, grabbing Richard's arm. "Richard, call the police right now. He has completely lost his mind." "Nate, you are having a psychotic break. You need psychiatric help, not a boardroom. Leave right now before your father presses charges. We are trying to protect you from yourself." The gaslighting was relentless even now. She was still trying to frame my defiance as a mental breakdown. She needed me to be crazy so she could remain the sane, benevolent mother. Cassidy pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping furiously against the screen. "I am calling Caldwell," she snapped. "You are going to leave this room in handcuffs, Nate. You really thought you could just walk in here and sit in dad chair? You own absolutely nothing. You are nothing. Call him." I challenged softly, looking directly at my sister. "Call Mr. Caldwell. I am sure he is extremely eager to join us." DeAndre slammed his hand down on the table, leaning aggressively toward me. "Get up, Nate. This is your absolute last warning. I am the incoming chief executive officer of this company. This is my boardroom now. You are going to stand up, apologize to your father, and walk out that door, or I am going to physically remove you myself." He took a threatening step forward, flexing his broad shoulders, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he always did. I waited. I did not flinch or break eye contact as DeAndre loomed over me. His fists were balled so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He was a fraction of a second away from grabbing the lapels of my suit. Before he could make that fatal mistake, the heavy boardroom doors swung open again. The polished wood banged loudly against the wall, stops freezing everyone in the room. DeAndre whipped his head around, ready to scream at whatever administrative assistant dared to interrupt his show of force. But it was not an assistant. Mr. Caldwell stepped into the room. He did not look at my father. He did not look at DeAndre. He stood at perfect military attention and held the door wide open. A second later, Oliver walked in. Oliver was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit from Savile Row, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture rigid and commanding. He carried a massive locked leather briefcase in one hand. His cold, calculating eyes swept the room entirely, dismissing my family before landing respectfully on me. "Who the hell are you?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking slightly at the sudden intrusion of this formidable stranger. "Caldwell. I told you to bring security, not some random lawyer. Get these people out of my boardroom." Caldwell finally spoke, his deep voice devoid of any subservience. "I no longer take orders from you, Richard. Allow me to introduce Oliver Sterling, Chief Legal Counsel for Vanguard Holdings." The name dropped into the room like a live grenade. The transformation in my family was instantaneous and utterly pathetic. The rage vanished from my father's face, replaced immediately by a desperate, sycophantic greed. DeAndre backed away from me, hastily smoothing the wrinkles in his suit jacket, suddenly terrified that his hostile behavior had been witnessed by the very people funding his illusion. Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace, attempting to project maternal elegance. "Vanguard Holdings." Richard stammered, completely changing his posture. He stepped away from me and extended his hand toward Oliver with a wide, artificial smile. "Mr. Sterling, what an unexpected honor. We had no idea Vanguard was sending a representative to our transition meeting today. Please come in. We were just dealing with a minor internal personnel issue. This is DeAndre Washington, our incoming Chief Executive Officer. DeAndre puffed out his chest, stepping forward to offer his hand as well. It is a pleasure, Mr. Sterling. I am the man who orchestrated the bridge loan with your firm. We are thrilled to have your partnership. The gala last night was a massive success. Oliver did not take Richard's hand. He did not look at DeAndre. He walked right past their outstretched arms as if they were invisible statues. He marched directly to the head of the table where I was sitting. Oliver placed the heavy leather briefcase on the polished mahogany. He unlocked the clasps with two sharp clicks. He reached inside and pulled out a pristine black leather-bound dossier. He handed it directly to me with a crisp nod. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Oliver said, his British accent echoing with absolute authority. "All subsidiary banking algorithms have been permanently locked. The asset seizure protocols are fully primed and awaiting your final signature." "Good morning, Oliver," I replied smoothly, opening the dossier to review the devastating financial data inside. Everything is proceeding exactly on schedule. My family stood frozen in a grotesque tableau of confusion. They looked from me to Oliver and back again, their brains completely unable to process the interaction they had just witnessed. "Mr. Sterling." Richard said, his voice trembling with a sudden creeping terror. "Why are you handing documents to my son? Nathaniel has absolutely nothing to do with Harrison Logistics anymore. You should be handing those papers to DeAndre." Oliver turned slowly to face my father. His expression was a terrifying mask of legal ruthlessness. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of dense legal binders, each easily 4 inches thick. He hoisted them into the air and dropped them squarely in the center of the conference table. The heavy thud shook the expensive wood. "I am not here to facilitate a transition," Richard Oliver stated, his voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "I am here to execute a corporate liquidation." At that exact moment, the digital clock on the wall shifted to 8:05. The synchronized trap I had established the previous afternoon was officially triggered. Suddenly, the silence in the boardroom was shattered by a chorus of digital chimes. Every single phone in the room went off simultaneously. DeAndre's phone pinged from his breast pocket. Richard's phone buzzed aggressively against the table. Cassidy's clutch began vibrating wildly. Patricia's phone chimed with a frantic succession of notification alerts. For a few seconds, no one moved. The collective pinging sounded like a countdown timer to a bomb they could not see. "Check your devices," I commanded softly, leaning back in my chair. "I highly recommend you read the alerts." DeAndre was the first to pull out his phone. He swiped across the screen, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Then his eyes widened so far I thought they might pop out of his skull. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He tapped the screen frantically, his thumbs flying across the glass, refreshing the page over and over again. "What is it?" Cassidy demanded, pulling her own phone from her designer bag. She looked at her screen, and a strangled, high-pitched gasp escaped her throat. "Oh my God, my accounts. My checking account says 0. The joint savings account is completely empty. It says locked due to suspicious activity." Richard snatched his phone off the table. His hands began to shake violently as he read the notifications. "My corporate access is denied. The executive funds are completely wiped out. Sterling Bank just sent an automated message stating our primary credit lines have been permanently terminated. This makes no sense." Patricia let out a sharp cry of distress. "My personal credit cards were just declined for my morning purchases. They canceled my platinum card." "Richard, what is happening?" "The bank says we are under a mandatory asset freeze. It is a system error," DeAndre shouted, panic fully bleeding into his voice now. "It has to be a massive glitch at Sterling Bank. They cannot freeze personal and corporate accounts at the exact same time without a federal court order. I am calling my banker right now." "Do not bother calling Sterling Bank." Mr. Washington Oliver interjected, his tone laced with pure, unadulterated contempt. "There is no system error. There is no technical glitch. The freezing of your accounts was a deliberate, perfectly legal action executed under the strict covenants of the $150 million bridge loan you so arrogantly signed." DeAndre dropped his phone onto the table. It clattered against the wood. "You cannot do this. Vanguard Holdings is our partner. We have a grace period for missed payments. I read the contract. You read the summary page, Oliver corrected sharply. You failed to read the addendums regarding secondary credit line leverage. Yesterday, Harrison Logistics failed to clear a $400,000 vendor payment. That triggered an immediate Tier 1 covenant breach. Under Section 4, Paragraph B of your agreement, Vanguard Holdings possesses the absolute right to freeze all collateral assets the moment corporate liquidity drops below the mandated threshold. You spent your liquid capital on a luxury gala instead of maintaining your baseline reserves. We have assets, Richard screamed, spit flying from his lips. We have warehouses, we have real estate, we have the Beacon Hill mansion. You cannot just freeze our personal money. We did not just freeze your personal money, Richard Oliver replied, tapping the massive stack of binders on the table. We seized the collateral. Every single warehouse, every shipping contract, every vehicle, and yes, the deed to the Beacon Hill mansion. DeAndre signed a personal guarantee bridging the corporate debt to your private assets. Vanguard Holdings now legally owns everything you previously possessed. The reality of the situation crashed down upon them like a concrete block. They were not just broke, they were entirely stripped of everything that gave them power. The arrogance that had fueled their entire existence evaporated into thin air, leaving behind four terrified, penniless strangers staring at the ruins of their false empire. DeAndre stared at the massive stack of legal binders on the table, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He looked at Oliver with wild, bloodshot eyes. You cannot do this to us. Let me speak to the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Holdings. I demand to speak to the person in charge. I can negotiate new terms. I can offer restructured equity. Just put me on the phone with him right now. Oliver did not move. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. You do not need a phone, Mr. Washington, Oliver stated smoothly. The Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Holdings is sitting right in front of you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that occurs right before a massive detonation. Cassidy let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, clutching her designer bag tightly to her chest. That is impossible. Nate is a college dropout. He lives in a tiny apartment. He begged Dad for a job yesterday. You are lying. This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. My father stepped forward, his fists trembling violently at his sides. He stared at Oliver desperately, waiting for the punchline. When Oliver remained completely expressionless, Richard slowly turned his gaze toward me. The agonizing realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the edge of the mahogany table just to stay upright. Nathaniel, Richard whispered, his voice entirely stripped of every ounce of its former booming authority. It is you. You bought our corporate debt. I slowly closed the black leather dossier and folded my hands, resting them very heavily on the table. I did not just buy your debt, Richard. I bought your entire pathetic existence, I said, my voice echoing coldly in the vast boardroom. For 10 years, I built Vanguard Holdings from absolute zero, while you told everyone I was a pathetic failure. You constantly used my name as a punchline at your country club dinners. You handed my grandfather's legacy over to a charismatic thief who embezzled your operational funds to buy luxury cars and gold watches. When you were drowning in his financial mistakes, you went begging for a private equity bailout. I stood up slowly, towering over the people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel incredibly small. I approved that massive bailout. I continued taking a deliberate step toward DeAndre. I authorized the bridge loan because I knew exactly how quickly you would violate the strict covenants. I am the sole controlling shareholder of Vanguard Holdings. That means I legally own 85% of Harrison Logistics. I own the shipping fleet. I own the distribution centers. I own the corporate accounts. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I officially own the Beacon Hill mansion you currently sleep in. The corporate game is completely over, DeAndre. It is absolute checkmate. DeAndre stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant. The heavy gold Patek Philippe on his wrist suddenly looked like an anchor dragging him straight to the bottom of the ocean. His fingers went entirely numb. The expensive smartphone he had been clutching slipped from his grasp. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp crack, bounced off the edge, and shattered against the hardwood floor. He did not even look down at the broken glass. His entire reality had just shattered right alongside it. No, Cassidy shrieked, the sound tearing through the boardroom like a siren. She lunged forward, slamming her hands onto the table. "You are lying. You are a pathetic, jealous liar. Vanguard is a global firm. They do not hand over billions of dollars to a college dropout. Dad, tell them to stop. Tell security to throw him out right now." She turned frantically toward our father, expecting the powerful patriarch to immediately fix the situation. But Richard was entirely broken. He sank slowly into the nearest chair, staring at the thick legal binders Oliver had dropped on the table. The embossed Vanguard Holdings logo mocked him. He finally understood that his blind arrogance had cost him his entire grandfather's legacy. "DeAndre, do something," Cassidy screamed, spinning around to hit her husband squarely in the chest. "You said you had this handled. You told me the bridge loan was perfectly safe. You told me we were rich. Fix this right now." DeAndre stumbled backward, pushing Cassidy away with a trembling hand. He could not look at her. He could not look at my father. The smooth-talking manipulator was completely out of words. He knew the offshore shell companies he used to funnel corporate funds were now the property of Vanguard Holdings. He knew Oliver had absolute proof of his embezzlement. He was not just facing bankruptcy. He was staring directly at a federal prison sentence. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward from the doorway, his presence instantly commanding the room. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a digital scanner. "The transition is officially complete," Caldwell announced, his gravelly voice showing zero sympathy. "As per the legal directives of the new Chief Executive Officer, your employment at Harrison Logistics is terminated effectively immediately." Caldwell walked directly up to my father. He held out his hand. Richard stared at it for a long second before his shoulders slumped in total defeat. With shaking fingers, Richard unclipped his premium gold access badge from his lapel and dropped it into Caldwell's waiting palm. Caldwell then turned his cold gaze toward DeAndre and Cassidy. "Hand them over, right now." Cassidy burst into violent tears, clutching her designer bag, as if it could somehow protect her from the consequences. DeAndre ripped his badge off his neck and threw it furiously onto the floor. "You set me up," DeAndre growled at me. I stepped over his discarded badge. I simply smiled at his sudden collapse. "Checkmate is beautifully absolute, DeAndre." I stepped back, allowing Caldwell to sweep the discarded security badge from the polished floor. Patricia threw herself forward, her manicured hands grasping desperately at the fabric of my custom suit jacket. She fell heavily to her knees, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of high society elegance. "Nathaniel, please," she wailed, her voice echoing shrilly against the thick glass boardroom walls. "You are my only son. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot throw your own mother out onto the freezing street. We will do absolutely whatever you want. We will fire DeAndre today. We will give you the chairman title voluntarily. Just let us keep the house. Let us keep our dignity in this city." I looked down at the weeping woman who had spent my entire childhood treating me like a highly defective product. I reached down and firmly peeled her shaking hands off my jacket, pulling back finger by finger. "You sold your dignity a very long time ago, Patricia." I stated, my voice as hard and unforgiving as concrete. "You traded it for exclusive country club memberships and the pathetic illusion of superiority. As for the house, Vanguard Holdings already officially owns the deed. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your personal clothing and vacate the residential premises. If you attempt to take any artwork, jewelry, or furniture purchased with stolen company funds, I will have you arrested for grand larceny without hesitation." Patricia collapsed completely onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Cassidy knelt right beside her, glaring up at me with hot tears streaming down her pale face. But she totally lacked the courage to say another defensive word. Caldwell checked his silver watch. "The legal transfer is verified and complete, Mr. Harrison. Shall I have the security team initiate the physical eviction?" "Do it," I commanded, "and make it highly visible. I want every single employee working in this building to understand that the toxic era of Harrison mismanagement is permanently over." Caldwell tapped his earpiece, murmuring a quick, sharp directive to the ground floor security team. He then gestured toward the heavy mahogany doors. It is time to leave right now. Walk out voluntarily, or my team will physically drag you out. Richard hauled Patricia to her feet. He looked like a hollow shell of a man, his formerly arrogant posture completely shattered. He supported my weeping mother, refusing to look directly at me, and began the slow, agonizing walk toward the boardroom exit. DeAndre followed closely behind them, keeping his head down, completely stripped of his fake swagger. Cassidy trailed at the rear, her expensive heels clicking erratically on the hardwood floor as she wiped her nose. I followed them out, stepping into the main executive corridor. The administrative assistants and junior executives had already gathered outside their cubicles. They stood in stunned silence, watching the mighty Harrison family being herded toward the elevators like common street criminals. No one offered a single word of comfort or sympathy. My father had ruled this specific floor with toxic intimidation for decades, and now his former victims were silently watching his ultimate downfall with thinly veiled satisfaction. We entered the large glass elevator. The doors closed, sealing the six of us in a painfully claustrophobic space. As the carriage descended rapidly toward the ground floor lobby, the tense silence was broken only by Patricia hyperventilating and Cassidy sniffling softly. DeAndre stared blankly at the metal doors, his broad chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. I was a desperate man, actively calculating exactly how much federal prison time he was facing for his massive offshore embezzlement. The elevator chimed loudly. We finally hit the ground floor. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing the massive sunlight-flooded lobby of the Harrison Logistics corporate headquarters. Caldwell had followed my instructions flawlessly. A line of 6 uniformed security guards stood at perfect attention, creating a clear pathway straight to the main revolving doors. But that was not the worst punishment for my family. The entire ground floor staff had stopped working. Couriers, receptionists, analysts, and maintenance workers stood in a massive crowd, their eyes locked eagerly on the elevator bank. They had all received the internal corporate memo announcing the immediate termination of the executive board and the Vanguard Holdings total takeover. Waiting at the front reception desk were 4 cheap brown cardboard boxes. They contained the meager personal effects forcefully cleared from their respective offices. Walk Caldwell ordered, his voice booming across the incredibly silent lobby. My father stepped out of the glass elevator first. He tried to straighten his silk tie, attempting to muster one final shred of dignity, but his wrinkled hands were shaking too violently to manage the simple task. He walked down the security corridor, the unblinking eyes of 100 employees burning intensely into his back. Whispers broke out across the massive crowd. People were actively pointing, murmuring loudly about the sudden collapse of the previously untouchable executives. DeAndre stepped out next. A courier standing near the front desk let out a sharp, highly mocking laugh. DeAndre whipped his head around, his heavy fists clenched, but a Vanguard security guard immediately stepped into his path, firmly blocking his line of sight. "Keep moving forward, Mr. Washington," the guard commanded firmly. They reached the reception desk. Caldwell handed Richard a cardboard box containing a few framed family photos and a personalized desk calendar. He shoved a second box right into DeAndre's chest, forcing my furious brother-in-law to grab it awkwardly. Patricia and Cassidy blatantly refused to take their cheap boxes, opting instead to hide their tear-stained faces behind their expensive designer handbags as they hurried toward the glass exit. I walked slowly behind them, stopping short of the revolving doors. The crisp Seattle winter wind blew into the lobby as the doors spun, pushing my ruined family out onto the cold concrete pavement for good. I finally smiled. The game was done. I watched through the lobby glass as my family stood shivering on the cold Seattle pavement. They looked completely disoriented. They had no access to the corporate vehicles parked in the executive garage. They had no active credit cards to summon a luxury car service. They were just 4 ordinary people holding cheap cardboard boxes. I turned away from the revolving doors and walked toward the private elevator. The physical eviction was highly satisfying, but the psychological destruction was just beginning. I rode back up to my penthouse office and directed my attention to the large wall monitors. When Vanguard Holdings officially acquired the debt on the Beacon Hill mansion, I authorized a complete security upgrade. That upgrade included high-definition interior surveillance cameras. I sat at my desk and pulled up the live feeds from the primary living areas of their massive home. It took them nearly 2 hours to navigate public transportation and arrive at the estate. I watched the monitors as they dragged their boxes through the front door. The grand foyer, usually a place of boastful family gatherings, suddenly looked like a tomb. My parents retreated to the master suite entirely broken and defeated. They were desperate to hide from the reality of their massive financial collapse. But the real entertainment was happening in the East Wing. I switched the main audio feed to the guest suite, occupied by DeAndre and my sister. The tension in that room was thick enough to slice with a knife. Cassidy threw her cardboard box onto the expensive duvet and immediately began pulling designer dresses from her massive walk-in closet. "We need to hire a moving truck right now," Cassidy shrieked, throwing a pile of silk garments onto the bed. "Call your contacts, DeAndre. We have to secure an apartment downtown before Nate changes the locks tomorrow morning. I am not leaving my vintage bags behind." DeAndre stood perfectly still in the center of the bedroom. His broad shoulders slumped and his breathing was erratic. He stared at his empty hands. He did not reach for his phone. He did not offer a comforting lie. "Did you hear me?" Cassidy snapped, turning around with a handful of designer shoes. "Stop standing there like an idiot and fix this. Call the offshore bank. Wire the emergency funds you always brag about. We need liquid cash right this second." DeAndre finally looked up. His face was a mask of pure panic. The smooth-talking corporate shark was completely gone. In his place stood a cornered criminal realizing the severity of his impending federal prison sentence. "There is no offshore money," DeAndre growled, his deep voice cracking with raw desperation. "Vanguard Holdings seized the shell companies this morning. Your brother took everything. The accounts are wiped clean. We have zero cash. We cannot afford a moving truck. We cannot even afford a cheap motel room tonight." Cassidy dropped the expensive shoes onto the hardwood floor. They landed with a sharp clatter. "What do you mean there is no money? You told me you transferred $12 million into private accounts. You said we were permanently protected from the debt." "I lied," DeAndre shouted, taking an aggressive step toward her. "I lied to keep you and your arrogant father off my back. I funneled that money to cover my tracks, and your brother found it. He found all of it. Do you understand what that means? It is not just bankruptcy, it is federal wire fraud. I am facing 20 years in a penitentiary because I tried to save this family." Cassidy's face contorted with sudden rage. "You tried to save us. You stole from my grandfather company. You bought luxury cars and gold watches while telling us you were a financial genius. You are nothing but a common thief. You absolutely ruined our lives." DeAndre lunged forward. He grabbed Cassidy by the shoulders and shoved her forcefully backward. She stumbled and crashed into the edge of the heavy wooden dresser. She let out a sharp cry of pain, clutching her side. I watched the monitor intently, my finger hovering over the button to dispatch local police if the physical violence escalated any further. "I ruined your lives," DeAndre spit the words out with venomous hatred. "You demanded this lifestyle, Cassidy. You demanded the European vacations, the private jets, the five-star dinners. I embezzled that money to keep you dripping in diamonds because if I stopped spending, you would have realized I was broke when we met. You are a shallow, greedy parasite, and I am not going to prison for you." He turned away from her sobbing figure and grabbed a leather duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. He began frantically shoving his remaining luxury watches, a small stash of hidden physical cash, and his passport into the bag. He was abandoning ship. The great savior of the Harrison family was running away like a coward. "Where are you going?" Cassidy screamed, pulling herself up from the floor. "You cannot just leave me here. We are legally married. You have to fix this mess." "I am getting out of the country before your brother hands that dossier over to the federal authorities," DeAndre snapped, zipping the heavy duffel bag shut. "You and your miserable parents can rot in this empty house. Do not ever try to contact me again." He threw the bag over his shoulder and sprinted out of the bedroom. The surveillance cameras tracked him as he raced down the grand staircase, bypassed the main foyer, and burst out through the rear kitchen doors. He sprinted across the manicured lawn, desperate to reach the street and disappear into the city before the hammer dropped. Cassidy collapsed onto the bedroom floor, weeping hysterically amidst her pile of useless designer clothing. I leaned back in my penthouse chair and took a sip of water. The thieves had finally turned on each other. The destruction was absolutely truly perfect. I shifted my gaze to the secondary monitor displaying the master suite. My father sat on the edge of the California king bed with his head buried deep in his hands. The heavy legal binders from the morning meeting were scattered across the expensive duvet. Richard was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute control. Now he was physically trembling, completely paralyzed by the reality of his massive corporate failure. I had personally rubber-stamped every fraudulent financial transfer DeAndre proposed. The legal liability rested squarely on his shoulders. He was not just losing a company, he was facing total financial ruin. Patricia paced frantically back and forth across the plush carpet. She refused to accept the finality of their situation. Her entire worldview relied on the absolute certainty of her social superiority. She snatched her phone from the nightstand and began dialing numbers. I turned up the audio feed, eager to listen to her desperate attempts to salvage her sinking social standing. "We just need a temporary bridge loan to cover the asset freeze," Patricia said into the phone, her voice pitched artificially high to mask her rising panic. "A small favor between friends. We can offer our shares in the country club as collateral." I watched her expression shatter as the person on the other end of the line responded. Her face flushed violently. She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen in pure disbelief. "What did Margaret say?" Richard asked, his voice entirely hollow. Patricia gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hung up on me. She said her husband saw the Bloomberg financial alert about Vanguard seizing Harrison Logistics. "They know we missed the vendor payments. They know we are completely insolvent." "Call the club," Richard commanded weakly. "Call the board of directors at the country club. Tell them we need a grace period on our membership dues. We need access to the executive dining room tonight so we can network and find private investors." Patricia swallowed hard. She dialed the exclusive country club they had frequented for 2 decades. It was the same club where she had spent countless evenings sipping expensive wine and loudly mocking my imaginary failures to her elite friends. The call was answered immediately by the club general manager. "This is Patricia Harrison," she announced, trying to summon her usual haughty tone. "I need to reserve the private dining suite for this evening. We are hosting potential investors." The response from the club manager was swift and utterly merciless. Patricia's face crumpled. She sank onto the edge of the bed beside my father. "Our membership is officially suspended," Patricia whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "He said our primary payment account was flagged for a Tier 1 default this morning. The board voted to revoke our access immediately to avoid any embarrassing scenes on the premises. We are completely locked out of the club." The high society friends who had eagerly consumed their expensive dinners and praised their false wealth had abandoned them in record time. In their elite circle of Seattle socialites, poverty was treated like a highly contagious disease. No one wanted to be associated with a disgraced executive facing a federal fraud investigation. Their entire social network had evaporated the exact second their credit cards were declined. "We have nowhere to go," Richard stated, staring blankly at the floor. "The house is gone. The company is gone. DeAndre took whatever cash was left and ran away. We are going to be living on the street tomorrow." Patricia stood up abruptly. A wild, desperate energy took over her movements. She grabbed her designer trench coat from the closet. "We are not living on the street," she snapped. "Nathaniel did this to us. He orchestrated this entire nightmare. He is still my son. He has to listen to his mother. I am going down to his office right now. I will make him reverse the asset seizure." Richard did not move. He knew the battle was completely lost. But Patricia was still clinging to the delusion that she could emotionally manipulate me into surrendering my empire. I watched her march out of the master suite. I tapped my secure communication console and connected directly to the ground floor security desk at Vanguard Holdings. "Mr. Caldwell," I said smoothly. "My mother is currently on her way to the building. She is desperate and highly unstable. Deny her access to the executive elevators. Keep her contained in the main lobby. I want to handle this interaction personally." "Understood," Mr. Harrison Caldwell replied. "The lobby team is fully briefed and ready." 40 minutes later, a taxi pulled up to the curb outside my towering glass skyscraper. Patricia stepped out. She looked frantic, her hair slightly disheveled, her coat hastily buttoned. She marched through the revolving doors with a false sense of aggressive entitlement. She stormed straight toward the private elevator bank reserved strictly for Vanguard executives. Two heavily armored security guards immediately stepped into her path, blocking her advance. "Move out of my way, right this second," Patricia demanded, pointing her finger at the guards. "I am Patricia Harrison. The chief executive officer of this company is my son. I demand to be taken up to his penthouse office immediately." Mr. Caldwell stepped out from behind the security desk. He walked slowly toward her, his hands clasped behind his back, projecting absolute immovable authority. "You have no authorization to be in this building," Mrs. Harrison Caldwell stated in his deep, gravelly voice. "You are currently trespassing on Vanguard private property. Caldwell, you work for my husband." Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing loudly across the massive marble lobby. "Tell these hired thugs to step aside right now. I need to see Nathaniel. I am his mother." Caldwell looked down at her with zero sympathy. "I work for Vanguard Holdings. I take my orders directly from Mr. Harrison, and his explicit orders are to deny you entry." I stood in my penthouse office watching the live security feed on my large monitor. I pressed a button on my desk console, activating the two-way audio system connected to the lobby ceiling speakers. My voice boomed down into the cavernous space below, echoing off the polished marble floors. "You are wasting your time, Patricia," I announced. Patricia gasped and looked wildly up at the ceiling. "Nathaniel, please, you have to stop this. Your father is having a breakdown. DeAndre stole from us and ran away. We have absolutely nothing left. You cannot let your own parents lose their home. We raised you. We gave you everything." I leaned forward, my voice cold and hard as steel. "You gave me nothing but relentless criticism and conditional love. You spent my entire life trying to make me feel completely worthless. You kicked me out of the boardroom yesterday and told me I was a failure who did not belong in your elite world. You were right about one thing. I do not belong in your world. I bought it and I am tearing it down." "Nathaniel, I am begging you," Patricia cried, tears streaming down her face as she dropped to her knees in the middle of the corporate lobby. She clasped her hands together in a pathetic display of submission. "Please, just give us back the house. I will do whatever you want. I will be the mother you always wanted. Just do not leave us on the street." The employees walking through the lobby stopped and stared at the wealthy woman sobbing on her knees. The public humiliation was absolute. "You chose your golden children and your elite friends over me," I said, finalizing the execution. "Your friends abandoned you, your golden son-in-law robbed you, and now you have nothing left to leverage. Escort her out of the building, Caldwell. If she resists, call the police." I released the intercom button, cutting off her desperate screams. I watched on the screen as Caldwell and the guards physically lifted my weeping mother off the floor and guided her forcefully out the revolving doors. She was thrust back onto the cold pavement, completely locked out of the empire she had tried to steal. The high society queen was finally dethroned. The high society queen was finally dethroned. 48 hours later, my secure phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. It was my father. The message was entirely devoid of his usual commanding tone. It was a pathetic, broken plea for one final conversation. He begged for 10 minutes of my time, claiming they had absolutely no money for food and were currently staying in a cheap roadside motel outside the city limits. He asked to meet anywhere I chose. I decided to grant them this single final audience. I chose a greasy, rundown diner on the industrial outskirts of Seattle, a place so far removed from their elite social circles that stepping inside would feel like landing on an alien planet to them. I wanted them to fully experience the harsh reality of their new social standing. I arrived at the diner precisely at noon. Thorne parked the armored Escalade near the cracked, weed-infested sidewalk. I stepped out into the damp afternoon air, adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit. The neon sign above the diner buzzed loudly, flickering against the gray sky. I pushed open the smudged glass door. The heavy smell of cheap frying oil and burnt coffee hit me instantly. I scanned the dim room and found them sitting in a cracked vinyl booth near the back, hiding from the world. Richard and Patricia Harrison were completely unrecognizable. The former titans of Seattle high society looked like aged, exhausted shadows of their former selves. My father wore a wrinkled button-down shirt that had clearly been slept in. He had not shaved in days. His hands rested flat on the sticky laminate table, trembling slightly. My mother sat slumped against the vinyl wearing a plain, oversized gray sweater. Her hair was unstyled frizzy, and her face lacked the heavy, expensive makeup she usually wore as armor. They looked entirely broken. I walked over and slid into the booth opposite them. I did not offer a greeting. I just looked at them with cold, calculated silence. Nathaniel Richard began, his voice hoarse and incredibly brittle. "Thank you for coming. We did not know if you would actually show up." "I am here," I stated flatly. "You asked for 10 minutes. The clock is currently running. Make it count." Patricia reached across the sticky table, attempting to grasp my hand. I pulled my hand back sharply, folding my arms across my chest. She flinched, pulling her empty hands back into her lap. "Nate, please," Patricia pleaded, fresh tears welling in her exhausted, red-rimmed eyes. "We have absolutely nothing left. The bank foreclosed on the motel credit card this morning. Cassidy will not return our calls. She took whatever cash she had and abandoned us. DeAndre is completely gone. We are sleeping in a public shelter tonight if you do not help us. You have to help us. We are your parents. We are your family." "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang heavily over the cheap laminate table. "You keep using that word, Patricia. I do not think you actually know what it means." "We made mistakes," Richard interrupted, leaning forward with a desperate, pleading expression. "Massive, unforgivable mistakes. I was blinded by DeAndre and his false promises. I was arrogant. I treated you terribly, and I deeply regret it. I will regret it until the day I die. But we raised you, Nathaniel. We gave you life. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood to the streets." I stared at the man who had ordered security to arrest me just days ago. "You did not raise me, Richard. You housed me. You fed me while simultaneously ensuring I felt completely worthless every single day of my existence. You demanded absolute perfection, and when I refused to become a ruthless corporate clone, you threw me away. You abandoned your flesh and blood the exact moment I became an inconvenience to your elite image. You chose a smooth-talking thief over your own son because he wore a nicer watch and stroked your massive ego." "We are begging you," Patricia cried softly, ignoring the stares from the waitress wiping down the counter nearby. "We do not want the company back. We do not want the mansion. Just give us a small apartment somewhere. A tiny monthly stipend. Just enough to survive. You have billions of dollars, Nathaniel. A small house is a fraction of a penny to your firm. Have mercy on us. Please show some mercy." "Mercy," I said, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. "When I came to you years ago struggling to find my footing, you offered me zero mercy. When I sat in the boardroom and DeAndre humiliated me, you offered me zero mercy. You actively conspired to strip my final shares for pennies on the dollar. You laughed at my perceived poverty. You cheered for my downfall. You only understand the concept of mercy now because you are the one starving." Richard dropped his head, staring at the scarred table surface. "Is there absolutely nothing left of the boy we raised? Is your heart completely made of ice?" "My heart is exactly as you molded it," I replied coldly. "You taught me that the world is a brutal transaction. You taught me that weakness is severely punished, and power is the only currency that matters in this life. You created this version of me, Richard. You should be incredibly proud of your handiwork." I placed both hands on the table and leaned in closely. My voice dropped to a lethal, unyielding whisper. "Vanguard Holdings acquired your assets legally. You signed the covenants. You broke the terms. Your financial destruction is a direct result of your own staggering incompetence and overwhelming greed. I owe you absolutely nothing. Not a house, not a stipend, not a single cent of the empire I built while you were busy mocking my name." Patricia let out a quiet, devastated sob. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently under her cheap gray sweater. Richard squeezed his eyes shut, fully accepting the absolute finality of my verdict. The illusion was gone. The game was entirely over. They finally realized that no amount of emotional manipulation or guilt-tripping would ever crack the impenetrable wall I had built around my life. I stood up from the cracked vinyl booth. I reached into my custom suit pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and dropped it onto the center of the table. Buy yourselves a hot meal, I commanded, staring down at my ruined parents. And use the rest of your miserable lives to pay off the massive moral debt you accumulated. Do not ever contact me again. I turned my back on Richard and Patricia Harrison. I walked straight down the narrow aisle of the cheap diner, pushed open the smudged glass door, and stepped out into the crisp Seattle air. I did not look back at the window. I did not pause to see if they were watching me. I walked directly to the waiting armored SUV, climbed into the luxurious back seat, and instructed Thorne to drive me away. The heavy chapter of my past was officially closed forever. The heavy chapter of my past was officially closed forever. Thorne navigated the armored SUV through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, carrying me away from the diner and back toward the towering glass sanctuary of Vanguard Holdings. I watched the bleak industrial outskirts fade into the vibrant, pulsing heart of the downtown financial district. The transition perfectly mirrored my own life. I had walked out of the suffocating wasteland of my family expectations and arrived in a world I built entirely with my own two hands. My secure phone remained completely silent. There would be no more desperate pleas, no more gaslighting texts, no more arrogant demands. The absolute quiet was the most expensive luxury I had ever acquired. I leaned my head against the cool leather seat, feeling the residual tension drain from my shoulders. The toxic weight I had carried since childhood, the constant grinding need to prove my worth to people fundamentally incapable of recognizing it, was finally gone. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the manufactured obligation of blood ties. I only felt an expanding, profound sense of absolute freedom. We pulled into the secure underground garage of the Vanguard Tower. Thorne opened the heavy door, offering a respectful nod as I stepped out. I took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The doors parted to reveal my true empire. The penthouse executive suite was buzzing with focused, high-level energy. Analysts monitored global markets on massive screens, legal teams finalized acquisition contracts, and executives drafted strategies for the upcoming fiscal quarter. This was my creation. Every person on this floor was handpicked for their brilliance, their loyalty, and their uncompromising integrity. I walked past the bustling bullpens and entered my private boardroom. I bypassed the massive mahogany conference table and stepped directly up to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Seattle skyline stretched out beneath me, a sprawling network of glass, steel, and ambition. Somewhere down there, DeAndre was likely scrambling to secure a fraudulent passport before the federal authorities froze his movements. Cassidy was learning how to navigate life without an endless platinum credit card. Richard and Patricia were sitting in a greasy diner staring at a $20 bill, finally understanding the true cost of their staggering arrogance. They were no longer my problem. They were simply a closed file in the Vanguard archives. The heavy double doors behind me opened with a soft click. I turned to see Oliver and Caldwell stepping into the room. They did not bring the sycophantic groveling my father always demanded from his subordinates. They brought genuine, hard-earned respect. Oliver held a sleek tablet, his posture relaxed but perfectly professional. Caldwell stood beside him, his imposing frame looking entirely at home in the executive suite, now that his undercover assignment at the logistics firm was officially terminated. The final liquidation protocols have been executed. Nate Oliver announced, his British accent carrying a note of distinct satisfaction. The real estate portfolio has been successfully transferred to our holding accounts. The commercial warehouses are currently undergoing complete rebranding. We have officially purged their name from the logistics network. Excellent work, Oliver, I replied, walking over to the brushed steel wet bar to pour 3 glasses of aged scotch. I handed one to Oliver and one to Caldwell. And the remaining staff at the firm, the ones who actually did the heavy lifting while my family drained the corporate accounts. Caldwell took his glass with a nod of appreciation. We retained the core operational teams. We bumped their salaries by 15% across the board using the recovered executive bonus funds. The floor managers were practically cheering when we changed the locks on the executive suites. You saved hundreds of jobs today, boss. DeAndre had practically bankrupted their pension fund, but we fully restored it using the liquidated assets from the Beacon Hill mansion. I raised my glass. To the team, I said simply. To the team, they echoed, the crystal clinking sharply in the quiet boardroom. I looked at the two men standing with me. They were not bound to me by a random accident of genetics. We were bound by mutual respect, shared battles, and a fierce, unwavering loyalty. When I was a 22-year-old dropout sleeping on a cheap mattress, they were the ones who saw my raw potential. They helped me sharpen my mind, build my capital, and construct the Vanguard empire from scratch. They were my actual family. Blood does not make a family. Blood is merely a biological starting point. True family is composed of the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the trenches. Family tells you the harsh truth when you need to hear it, and they hand you a sword when the wolves are circling the gates. My biological parents tried to feed me to the wolves to save their own vanity. My chosen family helped me buy the entire forest. I set my empty glass on the polished table. "What is next on the agenda, Oliver?" I asked, rolling up my sleeves. "We have a tech acquisition in Silicon Valley that requires your final approval," Oliver replied, pulling up a brief on his tablet. "A brilliant founder is being pushed out by a greedy board of directors. The situation looks highly familiar." I smiled a genuine predator smile. "Let us go buy a company, gentlemen. I believe we specialize in removing toxic leadership." I walked back to the window, looking out over the city one last time before getting back to work. The sky was clear, the storm had passed, and the future was entirely mine to command. Sometimes the most brutal rejection you experience is actually the greatest gift the universe can hand you. When toxic people remove you from their lives, they are inadvertently clearing the path for your ultimate success. Do not waste a single second begging for a seat at a table where your worth is constantly questioned. Take your talent, take your drive, and go build a much bigger table. Have you ever been pushed out by a toxic family only to discover it was the exact catalyst you needed to build your own success? Have you ever watched karma collect a massive debt from the people who tried to destroy you? Share your personal victories and stories of survival in the comments section below. Your journey might be the exact inspiration someone else needs to finally walk away. If you enjoyed this story of absolute corporate justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. Remember, your true worth is never determined by those who are completely blind to it. Keep building, keep fighting, and never look back.